here's Helena with you, my colleague Ryan Milton, and
Howdy.
our favorite guest Larry Johnson.
I'm being held captive. Rescue me, please.
Being oppressed.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
As soon as we got you here, we will question you.
Yep.
And of course, there is always a lot to discuss. And today I would like to start with, first of all, with Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory. And secondly, what SVR has today reported on readiness of Riga, the capital city of Latvia, to give its territory for Ukraine to carry out terrorist acts against Russia. I have only one question. Are they suicidal or what? Because this cannot be, how to say, in normal, I cannot explain that behavior in normal human logic. For me, it's simple as a suicide attack.
Yeah.
And let me just add to what Yelena is saying, Larry, in your question. I was looking, I read consortium news a lot. I think you publish there. You're certainly friends of the gang there at Consortium News. There was a debate yesterday. Scott Ritter, Ray McGovern, both friends of yours. Well, with Joe Loria, a friend of yours also. And Scott, to my knowledge, in the past has been very much against this question of using tactical nuclear weapons. But he's saying that what Yelena's talking about, in his mind, it does change things. At least it appears. And I even have a video if you want in a minute after we get your comments to comment further on that.
Well, I took the warning sign from Dmitry Polyansky. So Dmitry was the deputy UN representative for Russia. He met and accompanied me, was sort of my handler when I did my speech before the UN Security Council now 2 years ago with respect to the Nord Stream pipeline. Now he's the Russian ambassador to the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, based in Vienna. And he was on Danny Davis's show the other day. And basically, he indicated Russia is more than prepared to strike targets in Europe, and that it's likely to happen. And you know, so if you want to be alarmed or have an indicator that something significant is going to be coming down the pike, that was it. Because Dmitry is not the kind of guy that's just going, hey, you know, this is what I think, I'm going to go out and give my opinion. Oh, no. He is a consummate professional. He was relaying what is the Russian point of view, position, policy.
He's a calm and extremely well-spoken and thoughtful individual. The one time that I spoke with him, I mean, he's I mean, let me just say, Scott, he has lots of energy and passion. Dmitry Polyansky is very diplomatic.
The Dmitry he's not ruled by emotion. Scott, you know, gets a little bit of the emotion, you know. He must have a touch of the Irish in him to go off like that. But you know, no, Europe is now played a very, very dangerous game, and Russian patience is running thin. The continued drone attacks on civilian targets. You know, it'd be one thing if they were hitting military targets, which has been predominantly what Russia does to Ukraine. But these are civilian targets which have no military significance whatsoever. So I would not be surprised that in the next month or two, you know, we're going to wake up one morning and Russia will have taken out targets in Romania, in Poland, in Germany, possibly in France, and even the UK. And then those countries will be looking at, do we do Article 5? Do we declare war on Russia? That this thing could escalate. But I think the Russians are now of the attitude that they can't continue to live under this threat. And so now, as far as tactical nukes, I know that Sergei Karaganov was talking about that, but I think you're really looking at it in a phased. They're not going to go there immediately because they have other options. The Oreshnik missile,
right?
They're very precise, non-nuclear, but can take care of destroying these other targets. So,
well. The point that Scott was making, what you just said, civilian targets. I think one video I saw, it's like they hit a highway or a bridge, sort of like what we condemn about, or what is condemned about the United States with Iran, that bridge the other day or a couple of weeks ago. So civilian target, yes, the excuse can be made dual use, but now take, for example, the attacks, I think yesterday, were on the oil production facilities that power all of Russia. What was notably different in my view was that Scott was saying this is something that could cripple Russia when you take out the energy production, and that he said, like exactly what you said. Great Britain, Germany, all of these other facilities that are on that list, right?
Well, yeah, I don't think I disagree with my friend Scott on that point as far as it crippling Russia. But Russia's just too damn big, and these drone strikes they're more of a nuisance as opposed to being consequential. But the but there is Russia can't allow itself to be attacked like that.
Yeah,
and the people are. The people are pushing back. Yeah, but the other part is the Russians still have a robust, functioning air defense system, but it's also a reminder that air defense systems are not perfect, and there's still some things to get through.
I'm not trying to cause a fight between you. I think that both of you have such. You're looking at the thing from slightly two different sides, and it's. I'm trying to. I always like to see the good, but there's reality too.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Yeah, no. You're not provoking a scrap here.
Yeah, what I have a little bit. I'm sorry, I have a little bit said about Russian air defense system. It was stated by Vladimir Trukhan. I think a lot of people here know him, and what he said, its efficiency is 95 to 97%. That's very high. But if you take 100 drones, still 5 or 3 out of 100 fly through.
Yeah.
And exactly, it was night from Saturday to Sunday when I was online. I was talking with one of my friends. She lives in Oryol, and she literally recorded the sound of air raid alert. I don't know if there are any military facilities in Oryol, but people are scared. And I think that what West and those people who are behind his Kiev regime, what they misunderstand, they think they can scare Russians. Of course, people are scared to a certain extent, but what triggers them, and Ryan, I think you remember when we talked to Koshkin Sibiryak on Sunday, he is also a person, a regular, like small blogger from Russia. And he said very simple thing. He said, when I talk to people like you and Ryan, we feel less desire to push the button and to destroy the West. But in general, people are outraged, and they're really demanding to strike the command centers, not only in Kiev, but also in Europe at least. So I think somewhere here is a very severe miscalculations. Russians are not scared, they're outraged mostly.
Well, let's not forget how big, again, not just Russia, the country, but like, say, Moscow, the city. So I was in Moscow it was a year ago when there was a drone attack on Moscow. And, the news media was focused on it. I didn't know anything that was going on. I was downtown at the Hotel Metropole, and then went out to the airport later that day. My point is just simple, that even 5 drones on a city the size of Moscow, it's a nothing burger. It really is. But it becomes something because the news media focuses on it and they hype it, and just like imagine if you reported every car accident in the same way. And so in a city that size, you're going to get 7 or 8 major car accidents in a day.
It's like psychological warfare more than anything.
Correct.
And that's feeding the Western audience, I think, therefore.
Right.
It's brainwashing. Now, on that question of brainwashing, not that I want to change the subject, but you know, you look at like the things around Trump, and I think he himself is a subject of those psychological warfare attacks as well. Now, one of the guys that was is supposedly one of his big allies, and this is also what I mean about the attack on the American people, and I want you to address this if you can. Steve Bannon, who, you know, sometimes I think he sounds sane, okay?
Right.
But now he is coming out with this whole thing with he's got some group that I was just seeing called the what is it called? Federal State of China to overthrow the CCP. You know, and it's all funded by these like convicts, okay? Convict billionaires. So what I see is that people are hit with left-wing, quote unquote, globalists, right-wing globalists. Always were, you know, those guys over there are the enemy. So that's just a perpetuation is what we're seeing here with Russia, just perpetuating this thing. And it all feeds into this perpetual war thing. Do you see something similar like that?
Oh yeah. No, look, building the narrative of a threat is something that that's one of the last things that the United States is very good at. And we start talking about the Chinese, you know, God, what their intelligence is doing. And so I always step back and say, well, what's our intelligence doing? So let's recognize that intelligence agencies, when they're running influence operations, it gets back to, do they have a clear goal, what it is they are trying to do as a nation? The Russians, with respect to their intelligence operations, are very, very clear. It is about the protection of Russia against outside threats. And to that end, they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that they have a good idea of what, like in this case, the United States is going to try to do to it. And that's where, you know, they became very good at being able to plant people into long-term positions. You know, they look like the average American family, but in fact, they were Russian intelligence assets. The United States doesn't have that kind of discipline at all. You know, the closest we've come is what are called the non-official cover programs, NOC, where people they're recruited initially into the CIA, but then they're let's call them sheep dipped to appear to have no intelligence ties whatsoever, and they're working as a businessman, or they're working, you know, they're in some job where there's no obvious intelligence tie. But that's not as sophisticated as what the Russians do. So we're constantly portraying the Chinese as this malevolent force eager to conquer the world, and there I would argue we're engaged in projection. We're seeing the China we project our own desires onto what we think the Chinese are doing, when in fact we're the ones doing it in the United States.
Or on Russia too. I mean,
Yeah,
remember Russiagate was that was the left-wing thing. Now this is the right-wing thing.
Right, exactly.
Actually, what Russians try to convey to the West: please leave us alone. We don't need you. Let us live normally. This is the main idea that I get from Russian speakers. So they are not trying to conquer Europe, at least. And when I talk to regular people from Russia, who when they hear the narratives, Russia is about to build up USSR 2.0 and they are going to take over Baltic state, a reaction from all of the people who I talk to: no way, we don't want to feed them. Leave us alone, guys. Yeah, this is what Russia is about.
Yeah, I mean the sad, you know, I've used the frequent movie reference that this character played by Mickey Rourke, he was hired as a detective to find some murderer, and the lead character that was hiring him was played by Robert De Niro, and his name was Louis Cypher, or shorten it to Lucifer. And but the point of the movie was that Mickey Rourke kept getting involved with all these murders throughout, and at the end, it turned out he discovered he was looking for himself. He was a man who had made a deal with the devil, and now the devil was there to collect. And Rourke had lost all memory of his prior dealings with Satan, but now it was coming home. And that's what I see with the United States. We're always out looking for this murderer when in fact we're the murderer. And people say, why do you hate your country so much? I don't hate my country. But at some point you got to step back and say, what is it that we are doing? A number, I came up, I discovered a shocking figure on Sunday. One of my students, a fellow I trained as a rifle instructor. I didn't need to teach him how to be a rifle instructor. He was a U.S. Navy corpsman, and then as part of his duties working with the Marines had him trained as a sniper. But this kid Jamie was all about saving lives. He wasn't about taking lives. I call him a kid. He's 43 years old. But at my age, everybody that's like in their early 40s, they're still a kid to me, like you guys. He killed himself on Sunday, committed suicide. Boy, just, what a gut punch. Then I discovered, as I started looking into just the broader issue of veteran suicide, 147,000 veterans of this idiotic global war on terror have died since 2001. So in the last 25 years, that death toll is more than the combined deaths, combat deaths from Vietnam, Iraq 2 times, Afghanistan, Panama, Somalia, Syria, Libya, all of it. All of the wars that we've been involved with in the last 66 years. The largest loss of life is from veteran suicide. So we're paying
Holy shit.
We're paying a goddamn awful price on that. And for the evil returns, sort of this concept of karma. Yeah, the karma is playing out. But what was so maddening and frustrating for me is like my friend Jamie, what a good kid he was. And he wasn't to talk to him, you wouldn't know he was a tortured soul. And so that's, it's that human side of this that these leaders, like Donald Trump and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden, all of them, they don't see it. And all I can do is hope that it haunts them, that when they die, that they are haunted by this, that they have to carry that as weights attached to their soul for the damage that they've caused.
Yeah, I don't know what to say other than, yeah, that is true. And hopefully that would shake Americans to their core, because like Yelena said, we've talked to a number of these Russians, and their view is, look, just leave us alone to build our country. And then over in China, their version is, look, why do we have to fight? Why don't we just work together and solve things? You can say that's not a realistic view. On the other hand, that used to be the American idea. We used to believe in industrial development of the population. I was reading about David Lilienthal, who was the chief administrator of the Tennessee Valley Authority. And his idea was, we want to spend money on electricity, make people's lives easier and better, give them more free time. Adding scientific discoveries improves the quality of the work that we do. That kind of thinking doesn't even exist in the United States by and large. Yeah. It's like, you know what I'm saying? That's the problem.
Yeah, yesterday, Andrei Martyanov was a guest, and we were discussing what the perspective West has. Andrei, of course, said that US has at least has hope. He written Europe off completely, that Europe is no longer a player as such. But what actually I see light at the end of the tunnel that I told him and that I want to tell you, because maybe this defeat in Iran and defeat in Ukraine, maybe this will help to sober up the Western elites to some sort.
Well, only if they actually take a real beating. This is so far this is a defeat without actually any cost of blood. So, the United States can always find a way to spin it as, oh, we won that, or, whatever. Um, the most interesting development in the last 3 days for me was that Iran reportedly has said that it has an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching New York and Washington, D.C., and that if they are attacked, they will fire and hit those cities. Candidly, that would be the best thing that could possibly happen to the United States, because it would finally bring home, you can't keep going around the world killing these other people in a cost-free environment where it doesn't cost you a goddamn thing. And yeah, we lose 147,000 former soldiers, sailors, Marines. We're 310 million people. That's like 2 years of car accidents. We can get over that. But all of a sudden, when you've got if the capital's in a smoldering pile of rubble looking like Gaza, all of a sudden that brings it home. And that, at that point, maybe my countrymen will start reflecting on, what is it that we're doing? Are we being a force for good in the world or a force for evil? We've been a force for evil, unfortunately.
Is there a connection between like regular citizens and former military personnel? Because I remember it was more than 10 years ago on social media, I was communicating with a woman. She said she was 25 years in service in the United States, and then she retired, and she got involved in a program that was for rehabilitation of Army veterans. And she said that there is nearly no funds are being allocated for these programs, and these people are left aside. Like practically, we had such a problem with people who returned from Afghanistan because country was falling apart. But now, what I see in Russia, how they are treating those people who come back from SMO and don't sign new contracts and who stay, there are of course there are some issues. Well, you cannot avoid that, but at least these people, they don't feel abandoned en masse. And what happens with the American Army veterans, that I wanted to ask you, because...
Well, I don't know what happened. I'd be curious to see what Russia does, how it handles these veterans. Hopefully it's much better than what the United States does. I'm part of the board of a charitable organization called Combat Soldiers Recovery. And it was started actually by my bookkeeper, good Lord, now 20 years ago. And she came to discover the need for this because her next door neighbor was a surgeon at Walter Reed Army Hospital, the one that used to be located on Georgia Avenue. And he was telling her about, so these soldiers, they come in wounded, major amputations, very serious wounds that take time to recover from. And so once they get the initial treatment, they'll then be put into like an apartment, a single bedroom apartment on the medical campus. And at that point, they're sort of on their own. They get food, but there's no they don't have income for other things. So what Combat Soldiers Recovery did was provide them like a $300 check. It's not a lot, but it was still, they could use that. They'd buy cleaning supplies, and but it was shocking to me to learn that. I would think that if you're wounded for your country's going to take care of your ass. It was just the opposite. It was basically, hey, thanks for sacrificing your body. I mean, one of the first recipients of this was the first quadruple amputee from the War on Terror, the so-called War on Terror. And unfortunately, this foundation continues to today because there's a whole new batch of soldiers that have come in that have been wounded as a result of this war in the Middle East. So the United States hasn't learned its lessons. We continue to indulge these foreign military adventures, and it's the average people that pay the price, not the leaders. They make money off of it, for heaven's sake.
Well,
Right.
I had experience with two people who returned from SMO. One is actually a chat member of a chat group where I am also, and he's from Far East, and he was even called on the television. So he was I don't know what his rank was, but he wasn't very top rank. But person is active, and he is being called a hero, and he is acknowledged, and he is in his society, and even by the state channels. And the other one, it started as a tragic story. uh, Person was wounded, and then his wife abandoned him, and he was in hospital, but he made a new family with a volunteer woman who actually helped him recover, and now they made a small society that helps other wounded who need rehabilitation, who need to come back to normal life, and they're helping them. So
Yeah,
these are the two experience of people who I talked to.
yeah.
So, and this was very positive. Well, that I can only welcome. But what I wanted to ask: do people of United States, how they view the soldiers in general? Do they view them as the heroes, or there is a kind of restraint
That is
between
they're
civilians and
they're largely invisible. You'll hear oh, hey, thank you for your service, that kind of thing. But as far as the military and their presence and involvement with these wars, it's most Americans don't see it. And
Except they become homeless,
yeah,
drug addicts, things like that.
yeah. Again, when you look at the toll, the number of homeless, uh, the addiction issues, and then, like I said, the deaths. 147,000 deaths. That exceeds the number of U.S. war casualties killed in action in the Pacific War and World War II. Okay, that's how significant that number is, and but most people aren't aware of that. I wasn't really aware of that number until I got the news about Jamie, and man, so that hit me hard because when you know somebody, and it's one thing if you see somebody that they got troubles and they're trying to deal with it, but if you met Jamie, you wouldn't know that he had a trouble in the world. But the amount of death and devastating casualties that he dealt with as a corpsman, as a medic, I'm sure that played a major factor in his mindset.
So, what do you think now? You kind of alluded to this. Are we going to continue with the Iran war?
Yes. Yeah. No. Well, it hinges on really one thing. Will the Saudis, and then to a lesser extent Qataris and Kuwaitis, will they cooperate? We saw 2 weeks ago that the Saudis and Kuwaitis put a stop to Operation Project Freedom because they wouldn't allow their airspace to be used for refueling. Refueling of these combat jets is the critical activity. The F-35s, they're not forward deployed to the eastern edge of Saudi Arabia or Qatar. I don't think, to my knowledge, they're not stationing them at Al Udeid Air Force Base, which is just outside of Doha in Qatar. Instead, they are back in Jordan at Mawafaq al-Salti Air Base, or they're also in Israel. Well, from there to, say, Riyadh, that distance, it's 819 miles, 820 miles. Those planes, they have a combat radius of let's call it 550 miles. So that means if they take off from Jordan, even before they can get to Saudi Arabia, they're going to have to be refueled in the air again so that they can continue. The kind of ordnance they carry is either the Tomahawks or the JASSMs, which are then those are basically become air-launched cruise missiles. And those can go up to 500 miles. So the U.S. aircraft never really has to enter over Iranian airspace. And then as they turn around, they've got to get air refueled again just to be able to get back to a home base. So the air refueling is critical. That is what's in Saudi Arabia at Prince Saud Air Base. And if the Saudis say, no, you're not going to use this, we're not going to allow that, U.S. can't conduct air operations, or the challenges in doing it have become really significant. They have to figure out a way to try to, ignore Iraqi. Iraq can play a role as well, refusing, which I see happening. So that's why I say it is, if it was left up to Donald Trump, say, okay, are we going to launch? Yes, he'd launch it in a heartbeat. He's not held back at all. But it depends on what the Saudis and Qataris do. And on that front, we've seen some interesting movements. Again, started 2 weeks ago. But the Chinese and Russians are serious about this construction of a new security architecture, which they talk about for the Persian Gulf. And with that, they've been talking to Turkey, to the Saudis, as well as to the Iranians, to come up with to come up with an agreement among all three that they'll basically preserve the security of the Gulf, and in the process push the United States out. So the United States will not be there anymore to stir up affairs. I am told by somebody who's in contact with Pakistani sources that are very at the highest levels, that Pakistan is very earnestly engaged in this on behalf of sort of the Chinese. So we got this diplomatic activity that's taking place out of sight, and we don't really have a firm. I don't have a firm grip yet on where it stands. I hope to get some information today on that front.
What about the UAE? Because I think they've weathered a lot of this because of the U.S. facilities there. And then you also have, I know what you're saying, it's the Saudis, but then actually more than the UAE really is, what is Israel going to do? They're still waging all these little things in southern Lebanon. It's not like they've stopped doing all that other stuff just because it's not in the news.
Well, yeah, but Israel is overextended, and the longer they carry out multiple front battles, the more if they carry out attacks in Gaza, in the West Bank, and southern Lebanon, they're stretching themselves to the limit. And particularly in southern Lebanon, they run into a bit of a buzzsaw there with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is using these drones quite effectively to attack Israelis in a way they've never been attacked before, and that's creating some morale problems. I guess right now they have a total of 80,000 troops activated to cover those three different theaters. They could potentially mobilize upwards of 400,000. Now, I want you to think about that number. The size of the U.S. Army in a country of 350 million people is 452,000. So you're talking about a country of 8 to 9 million people that actually are in country, that to mobilize 400,000, the strain that puts on that society is off the charts, and it's unsustainable. Now, Israel cannot sustain that, and yet they're under the control of these settlers, these people who are convinced that all this land is theirs, that it belongs to them, even though they don't believe in God, but they believe in this nonsensical story in the Old Testament that somehow this imaginary being gave them authority to have control over this land and this territory. And then you get a number of Americans that buy into that, and they're off to the races. So this is Israel's existence is being called into question as a result of this extended war policy, because they cannot sustain it, and the economic costs are significant. But they've been insulated from it because the United States has been providing money. Well, what happens if, not if, but when the financial crisis fully hits the United States, and we're no longer in a position to pony up money that we thought we had, then all of a sudden Israel's left to its own devices. And Israel, I don't think Israel can survive that.
Yeah, that's actually what I know from Israel, that they have imposed very severe censorship and nothing comes out really of Israel except for the Israeli state media, or
Right.
the maybe government affiliated media is allowed to say. And well, I had one contact there, but I don't communicate with these people anymore because of of political reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gave me a glimpse of what people, I wouldn't speak for all, but for them and their surrounding, and they're simply regular inhabitants of Israel, they were very anti-Russian in 2022. And what I came across is hatred also against Palestinian people, and that comes from regular people, and that really made me very sad, because sometimes you have hopes that the government is like that, but maybe people understand what's going on. But no, with that personal experience, I say I'm not trying to extrapolate that to everyone, but it was very sad. And
Mhm.
actually, a couple of days ago, I came across the video by one of the rabbis. I think he's from the United States, and he said absolutely crazy things like Chinese, Russians, Germans, Poles, everyone is to blame for the destruction of the Second Temple of Israel, and as if all these countries were against Israel, and now God is about to punish them. And I was so shocked to hear that. So he is accusing all the world of being against Israel. It sounds crazy, and this is some kind of uh, exaggerated victim mentality. I don't know, that everyone is bad and only we are good, and God is going to punish all the bad people.
Well, and just let me point out the utter hypocrisy of these religions. And in fact, this, some will call this an attack not only on Judaism, but Christianity, and to a lesser extent, Islam. At least in the Old Testament, they were the children of Israel, and they escaped Egypt, were specifically commanded to not make any graven images. In other words, don't create physical objects that you worship. And so what are they talking about here? They're talking about building a physical building, because that's the only way to, quote, worship this God, when that God told you specifically, don't do that. Don't venerate physical items. Venerate people. Venerate people. And so, again, we see that unfortunately throughout, we got these magnificent cathedrals and these magnificent mosques and these incredible physical churches. And those are erected and the money devoted to them while you have people dying of drug addiction and poverty, real human needs, that the human beings take a second place to these physical structures. And that's what's so obscene about what these Zionists are calling for. We got to build a third temple. Again, you're back to worshiping Baal. You're back to worshiping these items. And yet God, if you take God as speaking through Moses in the book of Exodus, they are specifically instructed, don't build all of this stuff. And yet then you get to the book of Deuteronomy, where they're given these specific instructions. Yeah, I got to have this much wood, this kind of cool wood, and this kind of gold, and this silver, and these jewels. And it's like the entire chapters on how to build graven images, which you were told not to build. So that's why I say this preoccupation with these physical structures and ignoring the human beings that ostensibly these structures are supposed to serve, that remains. It cuts across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Okay, I suggest we go back a little bit to more earthly things because here I want to bring up what Deputy Foreign Minister Rybkov has said, and well, it's completely different from what we were discussing. But Russia cannot ignore the strengthening of NATO combined nuclear potential and will take into account its military planning. And also, there is no military political foundation for dialogue on security between Russia and the West. To establish this dialogue, countries must take into account Moscow's fundamental interests. So this is, so to speak, one more nail into the coffin of,
Yeah.
negotiations. And what Lavrov yesterday said during his press conference, I also didn't find it very optimistic for the West, because Lavrov said that yes, Trump's administration is trying to at least to understand what Russian side is trying to convey them, but there seemed to be a force that inside the U.S., the deep state, as he referred to that force, that actually is against any, how to say, striving of Trump's administration to make any kind of peace agreements with Russia.
Yeah, Sergei Rybkov. I first met him in December of 2023. Alistair Crook, Pepe Escobar, myself, Eva Bartlett, I think Patrick Henningsen was there. It was just a small group of us were meeting with Sergei Rybkov. Dmitry Simes sort of hosted it, and we had a good discussion about what the U.S.-Russian relations or Russia's relations with the West. And I remember Sergei saying, look, at the time, he says, we don't have anybody to talk to. He says, during the entirety of the Cold War, but, when the Soviets were then providing pilots to fly against U.S. pilots in Vietnam, in spite of that, we still had conversations between our respective foreign ministries. He says, we're not having that now. Now, that has since changed a little bit, but it's not really sort of the formal communications going back and forth between State Department and the Russian Foreign Ministry. You got these, outside interlopers, the Steve Witkoffs and Jared Kushners. But, again, when you read what Rybkov is saying, pay attention to it, because he's just not making idle conversation. And when he's talking about the imbalance with nuclear weapons and how the West is treating it and how Russia is going to react, people in the West better wake the hell up. He's not playing.
I mean, do these statements, Rybkov, Polyansky, I mean, how do these words that they're saying even get to President Trump, get to the Congress, get to governments in Europe? Do they even hear this?
No. Well, I'd argue no, they don't. They ignore it, or they chalk it up to, it's just Russians talking. Well, all I can say from knowing both men, it's not like we're great friends. I've been to their house, but just knowing them in terms of both my brief conversation. Well, I've had more extensive conversations with Dmitry, but here again, they're saying the same thing. Pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
They're not deviating. They've got a script. This is the new script. So, and this attaches directly to Russia is laying the foundation that it is going to carry out attacks in Europe against those sites that have created threats and caused destruction in Russia.
I really think that West underestimates what Russian capabilities are. Also, in terms of Sarmat, that was like last week, it was reported to Putin that we have such a missile system and it's going to be on combat duty starting from the end of this year. But there was like grave silence in European press, as if they didn't notice that. Nobody. Don't they know what to do with it, or what do they expect in general?
Yeah, no, they're not thinking ahead. They're not thinking, they're not playing, like you play chess. You try to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. If I do this, what's the opponent going to do? And when they do that, what am I going to do? Um, that's a difficult level of thinking that, frankly, most people in the West aren't equipped to do.
And that is
Yeah,
actually
we have
very
to
sad to hear.
educate.
Well,
Yeah.
we're trying to.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I also had a question regarding American troops in Europe. So there were reports that there are plans that American will withdraw at least 5,000 people from Germany. And
Mhm.
where will they be stationed? Will they return back to the U.S. or to go to Poland or to any other country? Because it's not how things are done. That people are just withdrawn and then that's all. And now you
Yeah,
live on your own.
I think they're going to return to the United States. So they've got like you have a rotation. So a certain unit is sent to whether it's Romania or Poland for 3 months, and at the end of that, instead of them being replaced, you just don't replace them. So that's one other way that you get the withdrawal without making a big display of it. But the United States is still it's not building up a significant ground force in the Middle East. In fact, the problem they've got is where do you place these troops? And I got that directly from a 2-star general last night. I had dinner. One of my good friends came to town, and along with him was this 2-star general he's now headed into the Middle East to take over the ground component. And so we got to talk a little bit about that. So it was, I'll just simply say that the United States is not prepared. We're living in a different world.
But when you say ground component, I mean,
there are ground forces like the 82nd
mm-hmm,
and the 75th Ranger Regiments
mm-hmm,
that are in the region,
mm-hmm.
but they've got to be. They're in places where they can have some modicum of protection. But if you try to move them closer to, let's say, an assembly area where they could be launched, then the risk to them becomes enormous, because now Iran has cruise missiles, short-range ballistic missiles that can hit them. This is the kind of threat the United States has never faced before. We assembled troops in 2003 in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to go into Iraq, and at the time there was concern about Scud missiles, but the Scuds really weren't that effective. Now, it's a whole different ballgame.
I also have one more question about NATO. Say, is NATO necessary for the United States? So, as far as I understand, when it was formed, it really had a meaning, a purpose, and it was, how to say, maybe to some extent, it was the way to prevent European countries into falling into USSR orbit. So there was a political component as well. But now, do United States need all these European, so to say, allies?
Well, let's go back to the very foundation of NATO was built on a foundation of lies. That the Soviets were intent on conquering the world, spreading international communism, and they wanted to conquer Europe. What the Soviets did in taking control of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, they were creating, and then Yugoslavia, they were creating a buffer, because they had this was the third time in 120 years that they had been invaded. So they said, okay, the only way we can do that, we got to control these governments here. And so that's why they did that, not with the intent to go out and conquer the rest of the world or to attack all of Europe. But then what did the United States do? Well, we did 2 things. Operation Paperclip, where we take Nazis, full-blown Nazis, members of the SS, and we protect them. In fact, we bring them into our intelligence services, and Galen in particular was a pretty pernicious influence, and so they helped shape an entire narrative about what happened in World War II, which really didn't happen. And so when you're looking at it from the Soviet standpoint, you're saying, hey, these are so-called allies are now protecting the very people who killed 27 million of us. And so that hostility was baked in, but it was baked in for the purpose that you'd created this enormous infrastructure. And by God, we couldn't let a good thing like that go to waste. We had to keep it active. The only way to keep it active, we got to have a new enemy. And that enemy is the Soviet Union with their communist plot. Yeah, it's such crap.
Yeah, well, and the problem is now that's privatized largely, that type of activity. So it's off the books. So maybe there's some aspect of it that you can get congressional hearings or congressional investigation. But you've already said, Obama was a part of it. I mean, I don't know about now, but at the time, Obama was the president that had conducted the largest number of targeted assassinations with drones.
Yeah.
So now this is just par for the course,
right?
Largely.
Well,
except
and
it's off the books.
And let's go back to 1990, the beginning of Ukraine's role as a de facto member of NATO started in 1995. Basically became, I'll call, semi-official in 1997 with the establishment of this forward base in western Ukraine. What was it? Yavoriv. It was for all of it, practical effects. It was an official NATO headquarters, and so the Yavoriv, that was it, and that's where this all started. There was no intent to actually seek any kind of accommodation with Russia. This is all about the West was going to subjugate Russia, and ideally divide it up, take control of its resources, split it up, and then move on to deal with China.
Do you think that these Nazis that were said, I mean, not them already, but members of the family and their descendants, do they still have power in the United States? Those ones who were relocated by during the Project Paperclip, because what I have heard, for example, from an interview, he was a grandson of Auschwitz concentration camp supervisor, commander,
Frank.
And he said,
Hans Frank.
No, there was different person. Henry Gesse, or I don't remember the last name. In general, what the grandson told, it was he gave interview to the Welt in 2021, I think, and he said, actually, my relatives were always keeping the books, so everyone in his family was still ideologically they were Nazis. So, is there a possibility that people who were moved to the United States in this Project Paperclip, that they kept their views?
Oh, yeah.
And their descendants also kept their views, and how much influence they have in society?
Yeah, I'm not sure they have a lot of influence domestically in the United States, but still holding on to the views. Yes, I think that's very, very likely.
Well, I think it's been transformed because remember, it became. Remember, those Nazis became politically cleaned up and whitewashed. Maybe that's where the sheep dip thing comes from, because suddenly we weren't fighting fascism, we were fighting communism. And that's why I brought up Steve Bannon's craziness. It's like now you trigger people just by repeating communism and CCP or communism or authoritarian. Putin as an authoritarian. He doesn't allow lesbians to demonstrate to overthrow the government all over the place. And people just get triggered over and over again, and they just stop thinking.
Right. Yeah. No, the whole art of what I call media manipulation and propaganda still very active. And that's particularly now with respect to what's going on with Iran. Create a narrative, convince people of that narrative, and then most will follow along. In fact, I dealt with a guy Sunday who was from the Netherlands, who is selling. He's selling a virtual training system. So you use you put the lenses on, and it's for training people to do assaults on buildings. And I got talking to him about the whole war with between Ukraine and Russia, and he was I won't say he was brainwashed, but I started bringing up some things, and he said, "Well, we never hear this in the Netherlands." I said, "I know, you're being lied to, but they don't understand that that they're actually Ukraine's losing. They still in there. They be like, oh, Ukraine's winning, man. The Russia's suffering greatly." I said, "No, you guys are being fed a line of bullshit."
Yeah, that is what I see when I talk to people in the UK.
Yeah.
Very much it's that kind of a line. So it's a much higher level battle than unfortunately, I always think of the citizen soldier in the United States and the Minutemen and the people that fought in the American Revolution. Here we are, we're coming up on 250 years of our existence, and we're the farthest thing from the Republic, unfortunately, than that we should be.
Absolutely.
And that is frustrating. So maybe that's why we need Russia to actually shake us up, in the ways that we're describing here on this call. So,
well, at least we are trying to educate people and trying to, at least to those who want to hear, at least we're trying to tell things.
Yes.
And it's up to people if they want to listen to or not, but we're trying our best, I think.
No, you're doing a good public service.
Yeah, Larry, thank you very much for telling us about those veterans and those, I think that it is on Americans' best side. What you said about that is maybe one of the things that can break through a lot of that bull crap, because there's nobody that I know of who says people who fought as soldiers, they didn't make the policy. They were doing their patriotic duty, literally saying, here, I'm going to give my life for the country. Right. They might have been used bad, but everybody says, hey, those are the people that should be taken care of. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Right.
And the fact that they're not
agree.
Shows you that that's a crime that at least Americans could see.
Yeah, that is a big problem.
So
well, I'll see you guys next week then.
Yeah, Larry, thanks a lot.
Absolutely, Larry. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great day.